Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. The global markets for cereals continue to increase, with global supply struggling to keep up. This year has showed where there's any sort of disruption in the supply, the price of cereals tends to rocket. Great if you're a tillage farmer, but not so good if you're a farmer trying to feed these grains. Irish tillage farmers are at the mercy of global grain supply, as we feel the highs and lows in the same way as farmers globally. This podcast has been following a number of Irish men farming abroad, with Andy Mann in the UK, Tim Berger in Poland, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jim McCarthy, who's farming in Romania. Jim was a very prominent farmer in Kildare and always pushed the boundaries to make the farm system more sustainable. Jim then spread his wings some time ago and started farming in South America, and is now farming in Romania. Jim would describe his farm operation as supplying the Black Sea ports, and this is one of the bellwether markets in the world and often dictates the sentiments for prices globally. So Jim, before I say any more, firstly, you're very welcome to the podcast, and I hope we can delve into some of these areas today. I might just start by asking you, are you still farming it in Ireland, or are you putting most of your efforts to farming abroad?
Well, I was still farming in Ireland. In fact, on the 2nd of November, I was 40 years in Kildare, Michael, and I still farm one of the farms I came to manage, and I farm another farm. But actually, it's John Mulhare looks after the agronomy and the crop planning, and Niall Jackson does the work. But as long as the Minister for Agriculture continues to write to me, I'll continue to farm.
Very good, very good. So you're gone a little bit further afield. Obviously, you were across in South America, Argentina, I think, for a while, but now you're across in Romania. So I don't think too many people would be overly familiar with Romania, no more than myself. Maybe you might paint a picture for us as regards whereabouts in the country you are and the scale of farming operations that you're running at the moment.
Well, in 2006, we did a fund for Argentina, and people got paid out from that on the first week of January 2012. So then in February 2012, Kieran Mahan and Davies came to me and said, why don't you do all this again? So Kieran and myself and Julian Hughes went off and put together a fundraising document, excuse me, to raise the money for an investment. And we chose Romania because you could get scale and land ownership. And so we bought the first business, we fundraised then through 2013, bought the first company in April 2014. And since then we've bought 6 companies, and we're about to close our 7th one. But the 6 companies to date, we own 9,000 hectares of land. We rent another 6,000 hectares of what are called stripes, small pieces of land, 6,000 hectares. And then we share farm 2,700 hectares for 2 other farmers, 2 foreign investors in our area. And we're in northeast Romania in a place called Badașan County. And we will close another deal in the next 10 days. So next spring, we will control 20,000 hectares, of which we will crop about 15,500. We'll rent out 2,700 or 800 in small pieces. And we're wide range tillage crops.
Right, geez, it's a very serious farming operation you're running across in Romania. It is huge, and I suppose, look, again, to maybe give people a little bit of a comparison to where we are here in Ireland. Obviously, water is a fairly critical part to your operation over there. How does that compare on an Irish kind of, I suppose, our rainfall at the critical times? And do you have the soils to hold that water, or how does that function?
Michael, we get 550 millimeters of rain where we farm. That's the annual rainfall. But we have very heavy land. We've 40% clay, only 15% sand, but we have 5% organic matter where we stopped ploughing 7 years ago. And so, but rain is critical for us because if you get a dry year, you're down at 400 millimeters, which becomes fairly difficult. But because the land is heavy and good organic matter levels, we can cope much better than we would in most places. One of the reasons we went to Badașan is that historically it had very good May, June, July and August rainfall, kind of 16 millimeters in May, and then 85 in July and August, or June and July, and 60 in August. Now, the last 4 or 5 Julys and August have been very dry, except for 2021. Like everywhere else, it has been an exceptional tillage year in Romania, in northeastern Romania. Other parts of Romania hadn't it so good.
That's great. I'm delighted you're getting the year as good as we got it over here. That's great to hear. Jim, you mentioned to me previously around lime and pH in your soils. What way does that work, or do you have the same access to lime that we would be used to here in Ireland?
No, we don't have the same access to lime, and it's one of the reasons why we grow a lot of sugar beet, because we can get a lot of factory lime, and the factory lime we get is a brilliant product because they have to dry it down to 30% moisture under an EU directive, and so we can spread it with the breeder out spreaders. So we've taken 30,000 tons of that out over the last 4 or 5 years to get our pHs, and so now all the farms are above 6, and we're continuing to apply a lot of that factory product.
So when you started off, Jim, your soils were relatively low.
We had a lot of pHs in the mid-5s.
All right.
pHs. An odd one coming back at 4.9, an odd sample, a very odd one, but mainly in the mid-5s. And with the high clay content, and you really need the calcium carbonate to open up the pores and get the soakage. And by bringing the pH from 5.5 to 6.5, you cannot believe how the workability has improved.
Sure, and I would imagine the availability of P's and K's in the background as well, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. And this was farmed by the communists until 1990. They had their own, Romania has several big nitrogen plants, but they didn't bring in the phosphorus, and phosphorus levels were generally low. So luckily we've been over applying phosphorus for a few years to get the base levels up. And so now we can have a bit of a holiday in expensive phosphorus times.
And Jim, obviously then you have to contend with fairly extreme temperatures. You mentioned during the summer, it can be pretty dry and presumably very hot, but obviously the winters are probably relatively cold over there as well. What sort of ranges are you talking about, Jim, from year to year?
In the season, you'll have a few nights of -20. That is not the issue. The issue is the wind chill factor. That'll bring it down to -32 or 3 on a really windy time. And then we will get days of 35, 36. And if you get 10 days of 35, 36, it does a lot of damage. Luckily, we've been able to move seeding earlier and earlier to get away from the real effects of the late July, early August temperatures. And we have a good range of crops as well. And we have crops that we can't grow in Ireland, which is a huge help.
Okay, so you have worked obviously quite extensively trying to get your soils into a fairly decent condition. What sort of establishment system, Jim, are you running at the moment?
Well, the first thing we do when we buy the companies is we sell the plows. Land and should not be plowed.
Yeah.
And so we sell the plows, and we bought 2 Sumo subsoilers, and we start then putting out lime and subsoiling, because there's a huge compaction layer. Now some fantastic photographs and videos of real compact layers, and we then start going shallower and shallower. And now we're no-tilling our first crops, and literally, Michael, everything we'll have for next spring, because we're predominantly spring cropping with row crops, we will have min-tilled and cover crops, so that we will go to seed next spring. We'll be seeding green. Nearly everything will be seeded green cover crop.
Okay, and how does that, Jim, compare to other systems that are run with your neighbours or your
Well, Romania, is still very traditional. They're obsessed with ploughing, but the younger ones now are really seeing it in the changes. Excuse me. It is bringing, min-tilling and cover crops are bringing huge differences.
And you mentioned, Jim, you have a good range of crops in your rotation. What sort of crops do you have in it, and what sort of rotation are you trying to run with those crops?
On our poorer land, we'll run sunflowers, wheat, and oilseed rape, and then on the and some soybean. And on the good land, then we have sugar beet. We grow around about 1,100 hectares of sugar beet. This year we produce approximately 66,000 tons of beet. You will be familiar with beet growing, Michael, being from this Carlow area, and the old story about dockets. because of the scale of the business, our delivery, we will have averaged 205 loads of beet a week. And we grow about 2,500 hectares of wheat. But wheat is really a break crop because you sacrifice so much yield for winter hardiness, and spring wheat is a disaster here. And then our single biggest crop is grain maize. We grow about 4,500 to 5,000 hectares of grain maize, which we harvest for grain. And then a lot of soybean, and we're doing a lot of research on soybean because we think soybean with the min-till and no-till has a huge future. And because this quest for European produced protein is so big. So non-GM soybean is like, we have a 70-acre, 35 hectare trial field in soybean this year. And we'll have it for the next 3 years just to look at soybean growing. And then we're growing sunflowers in the really poor areas. And then we bought in 2015 a company that was organically farmed, and we've continued to farm that. And we farm 1,800 hectares in organic, where we kind of grow 300 hectares of spelt wheat, 300 hectares of linseed, 300 hectares of sunflower, about 150 hectares is in a full season cover crop for the season, and we grow 400 to 500 hectares of organic soybean.
There's a big mix there. There's a lot of things to keep your eye on there, Jim, between all the various different crops and getting them in.
It's a very I won't say complicated business, but it's because we started out in 2014 buying up the companies. We actually had to develop an infrastructure then, because we went to the second poorest county in Romania so that we could buy a lot of cheap land. And so we've had to develop out. Liam, my son, is my CFO. He did finance in London, and he came out for 3 weeks when we started in April and hasn't gone home since, and has grown into the business. So he runs the office end of the business, in that we have, 5 in-house accountants. We have, in Romania, you have to submit your accounts once a month to the revenue and a balance sheet. And then around all the land, we buy the land ourselves, we put it in the land book. So we have 3 in-house lawyers, and we have 3 Lynn researchers who are finding all the title to the land. And then we have 10 people who are buying and compacting land, because it was all given back in stripes. So we're putting land back together. So we have a huge infrastructure along with farming to actually farm. And then, like, we have 130 full-time people. 45 of those are tractor drivers. Then we've people at the grain silos, the compacting, we've maintenance teams. We do all our own building, all construction. We have our own we were 100 kilometers from the nearest dealership when we started here. So we put in our own full-scale dealership workshop with 4 full-time mechanics. Because to keep the machines going and the hectares we're doing is enormous. And so we have a parts division, the whole thing. It's a very comprehensive business.
Jeez, it sounds, Jim, like you're almost an entire town in yourself, in fairness, with all the bits and pieces you have there. It's
very diverse. It's very diverse. But Michael, the big thing is the opportunity that exists there. I mean, the competition for rented land in Ireland. We get offered land literally every week. And then we've brought back into production thousands of acres that were actually abandoned at the time of communism. I can show you a photograph of big tracts of land, 50 and 100 hectare fields that were abandoned, and we brought them back into production.
So would it be fair to say then, Jim, you're a bit of a shining light in terms of your farming business in that area, in terms of bringing land back into production and the types of yields that you are able to produce now in comparison to your neighbours?
Yeah, in general. Now, there's some really excellent Romanian farmers, and they deserve great credit, because in 1990, just after communism, nobody had anything because the state owned everything. And there's, in the county where I farm, there's some long-established Romanian farmers who are doing an excellent job. But, they're 300, 400, 500 hectare businesses, maybe an odd 1,000 hectare, and they're very good farmers. But there was a huge amount of land that was just lying there. So that was one of the main reasons we went there, that we could get title, we could get to own it.
So maybe just to you mentioned organics there in the way by, how you obviously bought into the system that was the business that was organics. Is it complicated trying to run those 2 different types of businesses alongside each other, or are they in any way complementary?
No. The thing is, Michael, that because of the scale, it is a separate unit. It's run separately completely. And there's a team of people in there, its own manager and its own agronomist and its own compliance officer. Because of the scale of it, like it's 4,500 acres. That's a substantial organic farming business, So it's not an issue. This is the flexibility that scale gives you, and so it's not. I have very mixed emotions on it. On the thing. One of the big issues for us is soil degradation. We're doing a huge amount of work on soil health with cover cropping and even down to interseeding. We're trying to number of crops. And the amount of hoeing we have to do weed control, to control the weeds in soybean, to control them in sunflower. Now the sunflowers are much more competitive for a while, but the amount of hoeing, we could be through the fields, the hose 8 times. Then if you get a huge thunderstorm, you have the top 2 inches is really cultivated, and it flows off in a rush of water. So there's a lot of problems around it, and it's not the panacea that's painted, and it's certainly not as environmentally beneficial as environmentalists would have us believe because of the soil degradation issue.
That strikes me 2 questions then, I suppose. Does it, in terms of its contribution to your overall business, is it standing up reasonably well? And maybe the second one on top of it, Jim, are you going to stick with it in the long term?
Yeah, here's the thing. We've got to watch it because we've certainly got a problem with phosphorus depletion because we don't have a livestock enterprise. There's no market for organic livestock produce in Romania. And in fact, all our crops are exported to Switzerland, Germany, and Austria because really the organic market hasn't developed in Romania. And it's one thing going organic. It's the other thing is having a market for it. And the other thing is that, in poorer countries, food price inflation is now a huge issue without trying to throw a lob on top to have organic as well.
Yeah, extremely difficult, all right. So, Jim, just turning back then to crops you have in the ground at the moment. How are they looking? Did you get as good a start as we have here in Ireland?
No. The rape is wonderful. We have about 1,400 hectares of rape in the ground, and that's beautiful because we got the rain in August for seeding. Most of that was no-till seeded for the first time with the Vadestad tempo seeders and 50 centimeter rows. The wheat was harvested. We cut the stubble as high as possible, and then we just mulch mowed it. And then we got some rain in mid-August. We did a no-till seeded it with DAP alongside it, 50 kilos of active substance, phosphorus alongside it. And that has worked very, very well. Then it dried up, and it basically hasn't rained since the end of August. And so in our part of Romania, northeast Romania, in the south of Romania, they get very good rainfall. So on the wheat belt down there's very good crops. We have 2,500 hectares of wheat in the ground and 0 emerged. 0.
Ooh, Shaney.
That's not just our part of Romania. And that's part of the driver of wheat because I'm only 60 kilometers from Western Ukraine border, southwestern Ukraine border. And basically all the ways across south of Ukraine and all across southern Russia, all as far as the Ural Mountains is the same problem. There's bits and pieces here and there emerged, but there is an enormous amount of land of wheat seeded and not germinated. And that will greatly take from yields because most of it is seeded with Romanian varieties or Ukrainian varieties or Russian varieties, which don't tiller in the spring. That's why historically they always seeded such huge seeding rates in case this happened. They'll tiller in the autumn, but they won't tiller in the spring. We're growing French varieties and Austrian varieties, and they will tiller in the spring, so we have some hope with the traditional growers. So this is one of the pressures on wheat. There is a huge amount of wheat in the big, because we're Black Sea exporters. We export through Constanta. So the Black Sea area, the huge wheat pressure, you can mark down the yields. We certainly have written down our wheat yield budget by 1.5 tons per hectare.
Just go back a little bit a second, because again, I get confused in the size of that part of the world, because it's pretty enormous, I think. You mentioned that it's going from your part of the world up into Ukraine, well up into Russia. What sort of size of area are we talking about? Are we talking about millions of hectares, are we?
From me to the Ural Mountains, probably 1,400 kilometers.
That's a long way. Okay. There's a lot of ground between you and it.
And Michael, that southern Ukraine, southern Russia, when you go about, the great cities like farming areas like Oriel and Tambov and Pensa, which are about 400 kilometers south of Moscow, directly. If you take from those cities south to the Black Sea and all the way to the Ural Mountains, the amount of land is just shocking. It is, I've been through it several times, and it is just, the scale of it is just beyond belief.
Yeah. Which obviously has a big, I suppose, impact, if you like, as you're saying yourself, on the sentiment of prices of what's going to come in 2022. And maybe we might just turn to that maybe a little bit. Obviously, the prices is one end of it. Fertilizers are another end of it altogether in terms of where they're after going. Your supply of fertilizer probably comes from a different direction maybe to ours. You were saying that in Romania there are a number of factories there. Do you think, Jim, that's going to be an issue for you in terms of supply and costs, and maybe how that's going to have a bearing on what you're going to do for the crops that are in the ground and your decisions maybe for the springtime in terms of profitability of crops?
Michael, I suppose the first thing is that we combine drill, we put in fertilizer with all our seeding. We bought 2 years ago a Valostad Spirit fixed seeder because there's very good work out of Ontario, which is the same kind of land as we have and the same kind of soil type in that, where on this high clay soils with low phosphorus levels, seeding the wheat into a band of phosphorus of 0.7 of a ton to a ton per hectare yield response. So we've gone to everything so we can use less. Our approach will be that we will look very much at the balanced mix and reduce the nitrogen. We can, for instance, give you an idea of the possibilities we have. In March 2020, when COVID hit, we had most of our fertilizer nitrogen bought as UAN from Bulgaria, but the Bulgarian border closed down in mid-March. And we were able to organize our suppliers were able to organize within a few days for us a train load of can from Russia, 1,800 tons of can from Russia, delivered locally. So we have great flexibility. But even, and then of course, we bring a lot of stuff from Belarus as well, which is not that far away, So the issue is that the fertilizer manufacturers have been too smart. They still have to sell fertilizer. Now, it's a major rip-off. The price and the supply issues have been completely distorted. This is an attempt because of high commodity prices. They will have to come to the market to sell. I think some of them are going to leave it too late, that the amount won't be manufactured. But I think a lot of farmers will greatly reduce, and I think that this will backfire on the manufacturers because people have long memories. As John F. Kennedy once put it, forgive your enemies, but remember their names. And I think this is going to backfire on them. There's been a lot of retailers had contracts reneged on the force majeure because of the gas price. They had the nitrogen bought, some of it paid for, and then they said, no, we can't make it at this price. And so they reneged on the contracts. Well, if someone reneges the contract with you, you'll be still to do business with again, won't you?
So, yeah. So in your part of the world then, Jim, can you see a lot of farmers out there reducing the nitrogen input and thereby the overall output would probably be reduced as well?
Oh, Michael, the overall output is going to be reduced right across Europe because, people find it very hard to over-apply in at this level or to apply enough in, And so that there will be, and this will be a driver of price. And I think that there's very few people realize this. I mean, I read in the American press quite a bit about farm press that, the swing to soybean will be huge because of the much lesser demand for fertilizer and soybean production. I mean, we can produce, if we get rainfall in August, Michael, we can produce the same gross margin from soybean as for 10 tons a hectare of grain maize. The difference is I don't need 160 kilos of N, and I need a bit less P and K. So this will change the cropping, it will change the a lot of things. And what it will create a problem with is protein in wheat, because we all like to eat good quality bread, and you need high nitrogen levels for high protein levels. That isn't going to happen. So there's going to be a big reduction in the production of protein.
Yeah, we're in for a fascinating year, Jim. I think a lot of dynamics have changed a lot, and really looking at the world stocks that's out there, they're on a bit of a knife edge as well. So if it reduces again next year, it'll get even worse. So as you mentioned before, the inflation in food prices probably only going to go one way for a little while at least, anyways.
Well, Michael, I think unless there's perfect seasons everywhere, prices are going to stay where they are for a while. Now, what solves high prices are high prices because production goes up. What has happened this time in comparison with other times when prices went up is that fertilizer prices went up, but production of fertilizer didn't cease like many companies have done. And this is a new paradigm. This is a new venture for us. That sure, there's huge fertilizer prices, but there may not be enough fertilizer available at that price in this year, because I think people have pushed it back, starting up the plants, and they might have pushed it too far, and that they won't get to make the tons they had planned on making. It's a good time to be a tillage farmer on your own land.
It probably is. Look, with that, we've kind of run out of time. We went through an awful lot there, and look, certainly your business is seems like it's going from strength to strength, and you're making huge strides there in your part of the world. Delighted to talk to you, Jim. And if you're willing, we'll come back and we'll chat again, maybe in 2 or 3 months, and we'll catch up with your business again. And I think your insights into the market is fascinating, and I think a huge amount of people will listen with huge interest to that. Jim, thanks very much.
Thank you.
So that's it for the Tillage Edge, and my thanks to Jim for joining me in the podcast. We'll return to Jim in a new year to get more insights from him and an update as to his farming operation in Romania. And finally, don't forget, if you like this podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcast or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.